So I grew up in this church that would not allow black people to have communion with white people. And for that matter, would not, without a special dispensation by the elders of the church, allow black people to worship in the church at all. So occasionally we welcomed a missionary, from some other country, and they would, be in the church with us. But this was the reality of the church in which I grew up. And for mysterious reasons not clear to me, around about ages 10 through 12, I came to the conclusion that this was not so, not right, that the racism of my ethnic community and of my household was out of joint with the way things ought to be. And so I decided that I would reject that. And that which I rejected, I believed, was Christianity. Because this is the Christianity with which I grew up. And so by the age of 12, I knew that I was not a Christian. I thought I was probably a Zen Buddhist. I had no idea what that might have meant, but I thought it was adequately distant. And there were no other Zen Buddhists in town, so it would be simultaneously hip and unreproachable, given that there was no one to compare me with. Very few years later, 2-3 years later, I started dating this Pentecostal chick, which was a bad move for a Zen Buddhist, and a worse move for a Pentecostal chick. It was a particularly bad move for this Pentecostal chick because she'd grown up with Christian horror movies. They called them evangelistic movies, but what they really were horror movies. They were badly made movies where, a guy would drive his motorcycle with his black leather jacket. You knew he was the bad guy because of the leather jacket, and he would drive, and he would have this girlfriend who was like a Pentecostal chick, and she would invite him to this revival meeting, and he would go to this revival meeting scoffingly, and the gospel would be communicated, and he would scoff, and he would get on his motorcycle, and he would race off into the dark, and you'd see him sort of, driving on the wet, slippery highway, and he would not see the railroad crossing, and he'd be gone. And that'd be about 10 minutes into the movie. And then for much of the rest of the movie, he'd be suffering the pangs of hell, with worms coming out of his eye sockets, and various other, damages being done to him. And that'd be the horror part. And, with sort of dangling microphone out of the corner of the screen, it being poorly made. And then he would wake up in a cold sweat, and he would, it was all a horrible, horrible dream, and he would give his heart to Jesus. And then, they would show this to prepubescent children in my Pentecostal chick girlfriend's church, when she was young, and so she's still having therapy, but she had all kinds of things that she learned from this, including the fact that you must not, I didn't wear a leather jacket, and I didn't have a motorcycle, but I did take my 10-speed bicycle back from her home at night, and so she could see this, I missed the intersection on my 10-speed bike, it's midnight, a truck crosses, I'm dead, and she'd never shared the gospel with me, so this troubled her. And she didn't want me to go to hell, which I appreciate. And she also had the problem that she was unequally yoked. Now, we were 15, we were good kids, we were not having sex. So unequally yoked, very broadly speaking. But it troubled her. And so in 1982, in February of 1982, she gave me, we were on an orchestra tour together, and she was a really great musician, and I was a terrible musician, but we were in the same orchestra, and we were on this tour, and we were in this public market, and there was this hippie guy left over from the 60s, and he was selling books at this table, and one of the books he was selling was this sort of duct-taped together Good News New Testament. Angela bought this Good News New Testament, and she bought like a rainbow-colored heart sticker, and this was the early 80s, and she stuck it on the cover of the Good News New Testament, and she gave it to me. And I read it, and it just exploded inside me, this encounter with this story. And so I had this sort of cataclysmic, normal evangelical conversion without the benefit of Christian horror movies, just this encounter with the gospel narratives. In the back of this Good News New Testament, they also had the Psalms. It was New Testament and Psalms. And so for much of 1982, I would be riding my 10-speed bicycle back from school, reading Psalms, because they were sort of short and I didn't have to get my attention too much off the road. My dad thought it was a terrible idea to read while bicycling, but hey, I mean, there's only so many hours in the day. And the psalm that really woke me up in 1982 was Psalm 8. So this is the version of Psalm 8 by the man who wrote the Bible, Eugene Peterson. Here I am. I'm recently converted to the Christian faith. I don't know what that means. I mean, I'm 15 years old. I've got no mentors. I thought I was a Zen Buddhist. I wanted to be a Zen Buddhist. Now I belong to Jesus. I don't know what that means. I know it isn't what I grew up with. But how? How is it not what I grew up with? How must I now not go back to being a racist? Because I had that for like 12 years, I was well educated in how to being a racist Christian. So how do you not do that? Yes, Psalm 8, it just woke me up. God, brilliant Lord, yours is a household name. Nursing infants gurgle choruses about you. Toddlers shout the songs that drown out enemy talk and silent atheist babble. I look up at your macro skies, dark and enormous, your handmade sky jewelry, moon and stars mounted in their settings. Then I look at my micro self and I wonder, why do you bother with me? Why take a second look our way? Yet we've so narrowly missed being gods, bright with Eden's dawn light. You put us in charge of your handcrafted world. Repeated to us your Genesis charge. Made us lords of sheep and cattle, even animals out in the wild. Birds flying and fish swimming, whales singing in the ocean deeps. God, brilliant Lord, your name echoes around the world. Really, I figured out why apartheid was wrong for a Christian from Psalm 8. This notion that we human beings are these special creatures of God and that there is a particular creaturely dignity to being human that we all share, regardless of race. That was the starting point for me in these devotional readings on my 10-speed bicycle in grade 10, of understanding that one had to stand against apartheid because it broke shalom, because it denied the dignity of God's creatures in our common humanity. Now, to wrap up with a sort of a preview of hope that I'll talk about this evening. Later in 1982, I think prompted by stuff written by John Howard Yoder and Ron Sider, I read Isaiah, and in particular Isaiah 58. And this, I remember walking in the passageways of my high school, thinking about this.